Andrei Fursov, who joins us now from Ankara. Andrei Fursov, thank you so much for your time. Listen, we'll talk about Vladimir Putin as well as a man and his leadership of the country. But I'd like to get your, because you're a historian and a philosopher as well, I want to get your idea of what Russia is today and how much of what Russia is today is influenced by the Soviet Union.
Of course, the Soviet influence is quite strong because many people who live now in Russia are of Soviet origin, for example, me. And what is more important, the industrial basis which is now in Russia was created during the Soviet period, and many Soviet values are still intact. Yet at the same time, there are almost 30 years passed since the destruction of the Soviet Union. A new generation was born, people who never lived in the Soviet Union. So it is an intricate situation of combination of Soviet and post-Soviet features. But to my mind, of course, this is subjective opinion. I do think that the whole Russian Federation as system is working due to the fact that it has social basis. It has to do not only with the military sphere, but with economic and psychological one.
Yeah, in terms of that social sphere that you're talking about, are the metrics that are used in the West to quantify what makes a good life, are they the same in Russia, or is there a different feeling in Russia about the place of the individual in society and an individual's relationship with the state?
And what do you mean by Western metrics?
Well,
I don't
I'll
think
tell you what I mean.
German
I'll tell you what I mean.
Is the same
Andrei?
as American, French, or Italian.
Okay, Andrei, what I mean is, does everybody want a nice car, a Mercedes car? Does everybody want to go to a nice hot beach, maybe in the Caribbean, for a winter holiday? Those kind of metrics that in the West are used to say, okay, I have a good life.
You know, what you are saying about Western metrics, it was just the same in the Soviet Union in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But of course, apart that, there were such other values. For example, feeling of solidarity, feeling of social justice, and so on.
Yes, okay, interesting. So that's exactly what I'm wondering, whether the people who are born after the collapse of the Soviet Union, whether they still have that same kind of feeling and the contract with the state, that we have a role to play in terms of what it means to be Russian and how we are as a collective, how we project ourselves on the international stage, and the things that make us particularly Russian are peculiar to us because we are from this country.
You know, part of young generation, of course, differs from the older generation. Yet the whole system, I wouldn't say that the whole system is absolutely different from Soviet time. So it depends on which group, which age we are speaking about, whether they live in big cities or in small towns, and so on.
How do those younger people relate to Vladimir Putin?
The French would say, ça dépend.
Ça dépend, yeah, absolutely. Andrei, how do the young people who we're talking about, how do they relate to Vladimir Putin, a man who has said very openly that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the worst thing to happen in the 20th century? Do they feel that he's a throwback to an era that should be forgotten?
If I understood you correctly, you asked me whether young people in Russia think that the Soviet experience should be forgotten. This was the question?
No, but about Vladimir Putin in particular, because here is the man, the president of Russia, who has said the collapse of the Soviet Union was one of the worst things to happen in the 20th century. So how do young people relate to a man who still thinks that the Soviet Union should be intact?
You know, the problem is that 70% of young people, according to sociologists, 70% of young people positively, give positive assessment to Soviet experience, and not only to Soviet experience, but also to Stalin. So from that point of view, I think that they can agree with Vladimir Putin that the destruction of the Soviet Union was a geopolitical catastrophe.
He is a man, the president of Russia, who projects his country on the international stage as impressively as any world leader. He is extremely active. He's a very fit man. He speaks with confidence. He is sure what Russia needs to do to get what it wants, and he wants to influence the world in the way that he sees is the right way. Once Vladimir Putin is not president of Russia, what is the future of Russia without him, a man who is so convinced that he knows the right way to behave?
You know, the transition of power in Russian tradition is always a tricky problem. For example, no one believed that the person who will succeed Lenin would be Stalin, and no one believed that it would be Khrushchev who would succeed Stalin. The same thing with Putin after Yeltsin. But I think that during Putin's reign, the regime formulated a social basis, political basis, and now the problem of transition, of course, is not so acute as it can be seen from outside.
Andrei Fursov, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Very interesting to hear your thoughts.